The federal deficit's a cancer really growing on our country.
It's a problem that we need to deal with now.
The consequences will be far-reaching if this is ignored.
It is such a huge problem that if we don't get a hold of it right now, it will be devastating to our country.
We need to fix this problem before it becomes unfixable.
The American Farm Bureau Board of Directors believe that fiscal responsibility is a top priority for the American Farm Bureau. That's why the Federal Deficit Task Force Committee was put together. And we were put together to look at the deficit spending and what the consequences of deficit spending would mean to us in the future. We've heard from numerous experts from all fields of Social Security to Medicare, you name it. We've heard from those experts, and they're all concerned about the amount of spending that we're doing at a federal level, and we need to bring that spending under control.
As of the 1st of May 2009, the federal debt totaled $11,208,076,192,300.55. That's a huge number. If you just stacked up $1 bills, the pile would go from here to the moon and back to the moon again. Every one of you owes the other countries who hold our debt nearly $11,000. And in total, your share of the national debt comes to nearly $37,000. Could you write us a check today, please?
With Farm Bureau, we are small business people, and we do know what debt means. We know that a large amount of debt will destroy our business, and it's the same with our country.
If we don't do something, we're going to mortgage our country to foreign governments. We're going to mortgage our future in a way that is going to really weaken our country. And I think most Americans want to keep our country strong, and we want to have the ability to be a positive force both for our citizens and for the world. And we won't be able to do that unless we can attack the deficit.
If we continue to ignore this problem, we as a nation will become a second-rate nation because we have become so dependent upon our foreign neighbors for their finances, and we can no longer continue to operate like that.
I think back on what happened at the fall of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union fell apart because they could no longer afford to keep up their way of life. And people don't think that could happen in America, but it could. We could lose the ability to spend money on anything other than the cost of our national debt.
If the deficit continues, and we get to the point where we can only pay our interest, what happens if we have a security problem? What happens if we have another attack? Where do we get that money to defend ourselves and build our security?
Since the beginning of the year, we have seen some major changes in our nation's economic picture, and certainly in the overall deficit situation. When the board developed the original idea for the task force, the deficit for 2009 was expected to come in at $213 billion. Today, the projected deficit for 2010 is $1.4 trillion with a T, nearly 7 times our expectations less than a year ago. The explosion in government spending and the deficit is not expected to last long. Once the economy begins to recover, the deficit should fall, but will still be north of $500 billion. A short-term boost in spending was necessary. Our economy and our financial systems were in need of some major cash infusion. Could the stimulus package have been put together differently? Of course, but some action was certainly necessary.
There are times for deficit, but also at that same time we've got to be looking in the future to plan how we're going to get through that deficit and how we're going to get back to a balanced budget.
We must admit the real problem lies with us. Our political leadership over much of the last 30-plus years has effectively told us what we wanted to hear, that we can pretty much have anything that we want, and we really don't have to worry about how we pay for it.
It's going to take change. People are going to have to get used to the idea that we may have to make sacrifices.
If you think it's tough now, what will it be for your kids? It may be an unsurmountable task at that point. Today we can make a change that may be tough to do, but it's not impossible. And if it gets completely out of control and goes further and further, it could be a task that we can't get over and can't get around.
Our federal debt is just a collection of all the annual deficits we've run since the beginning of the country. Sure, there have been some years when we've paid down our national debt, But there have been a lot more years, especially lately, where we have spent much more than we have taken in. You can summarize the federal budget pretty succinctly using one hand. We spend as a federal government just about all we take in on 5 things: national defense, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the federal debt. The problem is, unless there are changes, their projected spending path will consume our entire revenue budget. This will leave no money for any of the other parts of government, like bridges, or schools, the FBI, or even farm programs. So something has to give. Interest on the debt is non-negotiable. The government has to pay it, unless we're ready for other nations to call in our debt, and we're not. The task force considers national defense to be off the table. It's just too important to face cuts.
Social Security has become so important to our society. For a lot of folks, it's the only retirement they have.
For Social Security, there's some really concrete things that we can do to fix it. They are tough decisions to make, though. It's either increasing taxes or reducing benefits out in the future.
The number one issue that we found out is that you simply cannot balance the budget. You cannot reduce the deficit to balance the budget unless you get your arms around Medicare and Medicaid. It is the 800-pound gorilla in the budget deficit.
One of the things that we learned is it's not necessarily providing services or the number of people who will go into the healthcare system. It's the cost of that healthcare and how it has risen so much faster than normal inflation.
Medical costs are increasing faster than our growth in the economy, and by doing so, they are on an unstable path or unsustainable path.
In fact, Congressional Budget Office says if we don't make any changes, by 2070 or so, Medicare and Medicaid will take up all of the federal government revenues.
When you look at the statistics, the different areas of the country have very different medical costs. Some cost twice as much as other areas, and the outcomes are no different are no better in the high-cost areas.
I figured if you went in for a procedure in Neosho, Missouri, which is where I live, and you went into the same procedure in Alabama, it'd be relatively the same cost. I've learned that that cost varies so much from state to state, and even the procedures that they use vary from doctor to doctor. I was a little shocked on that.
We believe that there are a number of things that have to happen. Number one, we have to reduce hospitalization, hospital stays. Number two is we have to use information technology in a different way so that we can provide health care in a fashion that's less expensive. Number three, we have to be in a position where there are accountable care organizations that make sure that there's a single gatekeeper where people make decisions to reduce the cost of health care in the future. And once we start making those kind of decisions, once we have policy that helps us make those decisions, we think that we can reduce the cost of health care to all Americans. We have already taken a significant share of reductions in farm payments, but I think our Farm Bureau members will also agree that we cannot be at the table talking about significant cuts in the federal budget unless we also say that USDA is open to similar kinds of cuts.
I think farmers and ranchers are willing to be at the table and contribute their share.
Any cuts in farm programs or any increase in taxes needs to go directly to reducing this deficit, reducing this debt we're carrying.
Let's clear up a couple of misconceptions right now. You'll hear a lot of talk from some of the so-called experts that all we need to do is deal with waste, fraud, and abuse, and the problem will be solved. Another good one is that it's all because of earmarks. These earmarks only total about $30 billion. A lot of money, certainly, but compared to a total federal budget of more than $3 trillion, foreign aid also totals less than $30 billion. So eliminating both of these activities would not go very far toward bringing things into balance.
It just doesn't stack up.
That's a nice political solution, but that's just a drop in the bucket.
And finally, we should talk about taxes. Everyone feels like they're paying too much in taxes. But after we address all politically possible spending reductions, realistically, the budget will still be in the red. So if you can't do it all with spending cuts, you have to talk about raising revenue. And raising revenue usually means raising taxes.
Tax is one of those necessary evils because we all benefit from taxes.
I didn't expect that I would be okay with higher taxes. I have a problem with higher taxes. I think the government is supposed to be involved in only a few key areas, but after I see a lot of the numbers, we're below our historical average as far as income to the government, and unless we cut a huge amount of the programs that a lot of people enjoy today, we need to increase our revenues.
First of all, I don't like taxes. I certainly don't like taxes that are used for purposes that don't benefit me directly. But I think all Farm Bureau members would agree that if taxation is a must in order to balance the budget, in order to make sure that Social Security can continue on into the future, to make sure that all people have access to health care, they will say taxes used for a specific purpose and that purpose only are okay.
We take for granted so many of the benefits that we have. If we lose these things because we can no longer afford to have them in this country, we may never get them back.
Quite frankly, we've been living beyond our means for the past 30 years in this country. We've been misled to believe that we can have it all and not pay for it, not increase taxes. And the reality is it's catching up with us, and we need to do something about it, and we can, and we should.
So given all this information, here is a summary of the task force recommendations. Number one, first, foremost, top of the list, our nation must balance the federal budget. 2, we must take action to make Social Security self-financing once again. 3, as a nation, we must get government health care costs under control, recognizing that everyone has a right to basic medical care. 4, to accomplish these crucial tasks, the United States must be prepared to cut spending and/or raise taxes. The task force acknowledges that none of these will be easy, but they are all essential.
I hope this video has generated a lot of questions in your mind. That's why we put it together, to stimulate discussion and thought among you, our members. $11+ trillion of federal debt, annual deficits of hundreds of billions of dollars as far as the eye can see, or healthcare costs that will consume nearly all of our government revenue. You think about these numbers, and it is easy to be overwhelmed. Talk too long with the economist and things can really get depressing. But at the end of the day, this is a moral issue. Because if we don't step up now, we will simply be handing the problem to our children and their children's children. If we don't fix this problem, we're just sending them the bill. And how we pay that bill could well be our most critical national security issue for generations to come. So where do we go from here? That is up to you. Farm Bureau is a grassroots organization. You determine what policy positions we will pursue. The task force recommendations are in front of you. Have a healthy debate. Come up with your own options if you feel we need better policy in these areas. But above all, get informed and stay informed. As I said before, this is a moral issue. Farm Bureau membership has strong morals. Our nation needs leadership to address this enormous problem. Farm Bureau can help provide it. Now, the rest is up to you. Thank you.